Last year, the United Nations wrapped up its 13-year, highly controversial mission in Haiti. A new documentary titled It Stays With You highlights what went seriously wrong in Cité Soleil, Haiti, when peacekeepers conducted 15 raids that killed several civilians. Directed and produced by Cathal McLaughlin and Siobhan Wills, it's a point-of-view doc that speaks directly with those who lived through it. Cathal McLaughlin is chair of film studies at Queen's University Belfast, director of the Prison's Memory Archive, and we're pleased to welcome him to our studio. Hi, it's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Before we speak about the documentary, It Stays With You, I'd like to show the audience a clip of it.
Okay.
Sheldon, could you please roll?
Moi, juillet 2005 à 2006, mon ministère te prend tout le pays pour eux. Zone nan, moun pas dans la paix même. Nous pas content même, nous avons un problème. Un pile problème. Ou pas qu'à chita, ou pas qu'à coucher, ou pas en temps pour manger, ou pas en temps pour boire, ou même ou pas en temps pour baigner. Eh bien, là, je te commencé l'hélicoptère en l'air à passer. Là, ça, c'est tirer toute journée, toute nuit, tirer toute journée, toute nuit. Mais pas qu'à chita, ou pas un côté pour faire, ou pas un côté pour être. Là, les a tiré, ou pas sur le tir, ou à faire à gauche.
The gentleman in the clip there refers to MINUSTA. What is MINUSTA?
MINUSTA was the United Nations mission in Haiti that was brought in 2005, 4-5, as a result of the coup d'etat or overthrow of Jean-Baptiste Aristide, the president at the time. There was a breakdown in law and order, and the Security Council decided to mandate a mission to go in and help stabilize the country.
I was going to ask you that what was the UN peacekeepers doing in a country that wasn't going through a civil war, and this was way before the earthquake hit Haiti in 2010. Where were these soldiers from? Where were the peacekeepers from?
It is indeed an anomaly that there are peacekeepers in a country that is not experiencing a war. In fact, that's one of the real contradictions of the mission, and it still hasn't been resolved in many ways.
So we've never gotten an answer why that?
No, they operate under something called, or did operate under something called Chapter 7. But when the co-producer, Siobhan Wills, who's a professor of law, was investigating this situation, she discovered that they're applying international humanitarian law rather than human rights law. And international humanitarian law applies to an armed conflict situation. International human rights applies to a civilian, I suppose, conflict. Mm-hmm. So that anomaly is something that's not been resolved. They're using military guidelines in a civilian situation.
Where were these soldiers from?
They were from various countries. Troop donating countries tend to vary over time as well. They weren't always from the same country. Generally speaking, at the beginning, these particular episodes happened when the Brazilian general was in charge, and it was a Brazilian contingent, was the largest contingent, but also they were from Nepal and Jordan.
The survivors in the documentary that you speak to, what do they say that MINUSTA did to them?
The claim by the survivors is that in an attempt to arrest certain gang leaders, MINUSTA sent overwhelming military force. They closed off the neighborhood of Bois-Neuf in Cité Soleil. They used tanks, they used helicopters, they used armaments that would normally be used in a military conflict. And the collateral damage, which MINUSTA refers to, ended up being up to 20 in each raid, up to 20 civilians, children, women, older people, killed by military use of force that devastated. We're talking about quite vulnerable structures, corrugated iron, temporary shelters that people were living in. So it was almost inevitable that there were civilian deaths as a result of this.
So there were 15 raids altogether between a time of 2005 and 2007, and you concentrate on something that happened in July of 2005 and December of that same year. Yeah. The one that happened in July was called Operation Iron Fist, and that's what the UN called the mission. A few weeks later, the Washington Post published this. The United Nations does not compile records on civilian deaths during peacekeeping operations, but the top peacekeeping official, Jean-Marie Guéhenno, conceded that there may have been some civilian casualties during the raid. We have been looking very closely at those accusations, he said. There is no reliable tally of civilians or gang members killed. A UN account of the operation concluded afterward that the area remains under gang control. Security forces are still unable to enter into the inner areas of Cité Soleil or conduct foot patrols. In the film, you actually point out the MINUSTA itself stated that on July 6, 2005, some of the weapons it used included 22,700 firearm cartridges and 78 grenades. This is not what most people think as peacekeeping, is it?
No, and it was shocking. I mean, I come from Ireland where we had political conflict and we never ever experienced such overwhelming use of military force in a civilian situation. So it was a real shock to us. And the other interesting thing is that that's what they admit to. What they do not admit to, but every single person we spoke to said that some form of bomb, grenade was dropped from helicopters. And in a civilian policing situation, that is totally unacceptable.
What was the UN's response to what happened in Cité Soleil?
Well, they have denied they used helicopters. One of the problems that local people have expressed to us and in the film is that there was no follow-up investigation. No one came to them. No police, no United Nations, not even journalists. No one came to speak to them to carry out an investigation. We are aware that there was an internal report by the United Nations. It was not conducted on the ground by interviewing local people. So what the local people are calling for is an investigation, admittedly 10 years later, but they want proper on-the-ground investigation into what happened.
Because it happened so long ago, is there any time limit that they, once a certain year hits, that they can't have any justice, that they can't seek justice?
No, we have an expert in the film saying that there is no time limit to such an investigation. The problem, of course, is that after 10 years, a lot of that evidence is more difficult to ascertain. So, for example, a lot of the houses were destroyed. Some of those have been rebuilt. People need to live somewhere. So a lot of the evidence is going to be very difficult. That's a huge problem, but it's not the participants, it's not the survivors' problem, it's the United Nations problem.
I'd like to show you another clip of It Stays With You. Sheldon, could you please roll?
Di ministère yo c'est derrière son paquet de chat oui nous pas qu'à sortir non juste à 2h de l'après-midi encore oui tout le monde est honnête oui parce que nous fermons là depuis 3h arrivé 2h de l'après-midi oui nous fermons en bas cartouche là un paquet de chat derrière là pas de côté pour piquer les épingles derrière Bote gon l'autre voisine la prédé dit sauver mais puis en paraît et puis pendant que moi-même j'ai problème m'attendais son et puis pendant que Marie a dit pas sorti et puis pendant le cours il a sorti et puis il mourit à deux petits monde ça veut dire moi-même dit bon Dieu merci c'est Marie avec on seul perdu avec Marie qui prend cartouche simplement ça veut dire blanc toujours fait massacre ça parce que pour envisager après tout si clé am bagien ou après tout jour cartouche dans kaitol là parce que et kaitol nous gain qui fait nos victimes.
Corrugated metal and the type of bullets that were used is repeated by survivors throughout the film. Why was it important to make note of that?
I think because of the heavy nature of the assault in that situation, although the minister had said that they did expect some collateral damage, it is almost inexcusable that the level of violence used in a condensed, densely populated area with such fragile housing would not lead to multiple scores of casualties. It was almost, this is not just neglect, this is something which goes beyond neglect, and I think is something which is the United Nations needs to be held accountable for. They could not possibly have thought that there would not be scores of casualties in that situation. So we wanted to emphasize that.
What is life like for these survivors now?
It's really difficult. In fact, Jean-Pierre, one of the people in the film, has since passed away. Jean-Pierre lost his house. He had no ability to rebuild. He had no resources to rebuild. He lived in other people's houses. For 10 years, he kept moving from house to house. And in the end, his health deteriorated. He was a man in his 50s. He should have had another 10, 20 years to live. He passed away. Most of those people feel not only an awful sense of grief at having lost their 10-year-old daughter or their brother or their father, who was the main income generator, but also they feel, as one of them put it, I think it was Evelyn said, we felt worthless. Because not only did they come and kill us, but they took no responsibility afterwards for their actions. No one came to speak to us.
And a lot of the people in the documentary said that you were the first people to speak to them about what happened. Why do you think this story was ignored?
I think the story is ignored because what happens to people in the townships of Port-au-Prince are generally ignored. I think Haiti itself, as a geopolitical, in the geopolitical situation, is often marginalized. When events happen in New York or London or Paris, it's top of the news agenda. When it happens in Port-au-Prince, it's not important. And it's not important because these people are black, they are poor, and they live on the margins. They live on the edges of society. If you ignore them, who's going to care? So I think for those people, it was really important to break out of that silence, that curtain of silence that the media, that we in the West have imposed upon them.
And you had to do some work to get them to trust you. You actually showed them the finished copy of the documentary in order to get their approval for it, which is unusual for filmmakers or for journalists. Why did you do that?
I did it because of previous experience working in Ireland and in South Africa. Most people are very wary of journalists, reporters, filmmakers who come to them. As somebody put it to me in South Africa once, you come, you take your story, you go away, and we never hear from you again. There is a distrust of the media in many communities. And so I knew from experience that you needed to build trust right from the beginning. And so we had a meeting with all of the participants, in fact, in two communities, one in Boisneuf and one across the main road. And only one of those communities decided that they wanted to work with us. And that was absolutely fine. If people didn't want to work with us, we respected that. And so right from the beginning, we had a relationship of participation. We call it participatory practice. And so on our website, It Stays With You, we went back a year later to ask each of the individuals, we give them a little camera, and they have a small 3-5 minute section where they address directly the United Nations. So we want to work closely with people.
What do you hope that the United Nations, have they seen this film? Have you had any response?
Yeah, we know that they have seen it. And we showed it at Geneva, the Human Rights Council side event earlier this year. There was a reasonable response. We met with some people from the Human Rights Commission side of the United Nations, not the peacekeeping side. But we think that there is some movement internally. United Nations is an enormous, heterogeneous organization. It never speaks with one voice. But we do believe that there's some internal movement in terms of looking again at the records, at what happened, at why it happened, at lessons to be learned. I think for the participants, the survivors, the very best thing that could happen is that there is an open, transparent and independent investigation. We know that after this film was made and seen by the United Nations, the human rights officer in Haiti has spoken to some of the participants. They have taken the survivors to the United Nations headquarters in Port-au-Prince, but really it's just the first step. They need to go out to the places where these events happen. It needs to move much further and much deeper.
I mentioned that the survivors in the film say that you're the first person to speak to them and they felt ignored. Why did you make this film?
I was invited to make the film because of my background and my expertise. Siobhan Wills, the co-producer, is an expert in international human rights and humanitarian law. She has published. She's very well known internationally for looking at this area. And she was actually on research leave in Canada, in Saskatchewan, when she was offered the opportunity of traveling to Haiti. And the Chapter 7 anomaly intrigued her when she realized what was going on, what had happened. She invited me to come with her to record some testimonies, because we felt that recorded testimonies might have a greater impact than simply yet another report by an academic. And indeed, we think that those people's voices, and the film prioritizes those voices.
And you also mentioned that you're from Northern Ireland. Do you think that was part of what appealed to you to make this film?
Most definitely. We live in a society coming to terms with 30 years of political violence. It's not an easy journey out of it. It's not just good enough for the politicians to reach an agreement. The people who are most affected need to have a way of having their story validated, publicly acknowledged, and their experienced, I suppose, publicly witnessed.
And I mentioned that you were the director of the Prison Memory Archive. What is that?
It's a collection of 175 walk and talk interviews inside the 2 political prisons that operated during the Troubles. When the Good Friday Agreement of '98 ended the conflict, 2 years later the prisons closed. And as a filmmaker, I was intrigued by how people remember their experiences back at the site of the experience. So we brought prisoners, prison officers, teachers, chaplains, etc., back to the site. And so if you look at the website, you'll see some of these memories being recorded, of quite sensitive. Some of the memories were humorous, some of them very painful. And I think once again, people had the opportunity to tell their story, which had been hidden, which had been buried, either through censorship or through difficulty or through people's reluctance to put their neck above the line. So some prison officers, for example, come forward and tell their stories of what it was like to be a prison officer during that period.
How did your work with the Prison Memory Archive inform your storytelling with It Stays With You?
Participatory practice. If you're going to work with people in an area that's very sensitive, psychically, politically, then you need to work with people. I think it's Michael Frisch came up with the idea of shared authority. And so in a sense, people become, if not quite co-directors, at least co-producers of the work that you're doing. And I think that's really important to build trust. Why would these people trust me, an outsider, to come in and tell their story? And so one way of building that trust and that relationship is to say to them, you co-own this material. This is yours as much as mine.
What do you hope that It Stays With You ultimately does?
We want the United Nations to have an independent and accountable investigation. The United Nations internationally is immune from prosecution. So there will be no prosecutions as a result of this, unfortunately.
Why are they immune?
When it's part of the establishment of the United Nations for it as a body to be immune from prosecution. Individual contributing countries like Brazil can prosecute their own soldiers. It's very rare for that to happen. I think France is one of the few countries to have prosecuted its soldiers because of sexual violence in some African countries. Very rare, hardly ever happens. So we know there will probably be no prosecutions, but what we hope for is some form of public investigation and acknowledgement, and ideally some reparations for those people who lost their husbands, their fathers, their houses, their jobs, everything, devastation.
Cathal, thank you so much for being here. You've given us a lot to think about.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.